These are crazy times, right? The production of Supernatural shut down in its final season with only 2 episodes left to film. And they only have 18 ready for air. So what are we gonna do in the meantime? Well, I had thought, why not count down the craziest, scariest monsters that the boys have ever faced? Coming in at number 10, we have the Amazon. In ancient mythology, Greek to be precise, the Amazons are a warrior tribe of women, and their origins vary from story to story. But most settle on them being the children of Ares, the god of war, and the nymph Harmonia, which lends itself to their brutal, warlike aggression, with the 2 most well-known Amazon queens being Penthesilea and Hippolyta. In popular culture, most of us would recognize this to be the origin of Wonder Woman. Her current origin story places her as a demigod, the child of Zeus and Hippolyta, raised on Themyscira within the tribe of Amazon warriors. In Supernatural, the idea of an Amazon is somewhat different. They are considered a monster, and not a human or demigod. But unlike most monsters in the Supernatural verse, they are not a creation of Eve. In fact, they were taken from the Greek mythology of Ares and Harmonia. But that also means that they don't have an alpha, and they more or less look human. What makes them scary is it's not something that you think to look for. You never see it coming. When you think about it, a guy has a great one-night stand, and then he gets offed in a horrific manner. As part of their initiation into the tribes, the children are to hack off each of the limbs of their father, carve a symbol into their chest, and then, and only then, kill them. So these men are in a huge amount of pain the entire time, and the only thing they wanted was to get laid. This in of itself probably isn't all that terrifying, but for me, what makes them so scary is one thing we tend to forget about. Dean had a daughter. This honestly tripped him up so much that he actually almost let her kill him. And it was Sam that had to put her down. Coming in at number 9, we have the Changeling. The Changeling comes from European folklore and is usually sired by a fairy, troll, elf, or something of that sort. But essentially they are a child that replaces a human child. So the family unknowingly raises this Changeling as their own. It's commonly believed that this came about as an explanation for autistic children. These children were believed to be changelings and therefore abandoned in the woods. In supernatural lore, a changeling takes the place of a human child to feed on its mother. They are overprotective and clingy with the mother, or their food source. Though some mothers may notice a difference in their child, they are really indistinguishable from the human child itself, except their reflection. Their reflection reveals them to be what they are. Hollow eyes with round sucker-like mouths with sharp teeth. Not only are they creepy to look at, but they essentially feed off of your life force, and they will kill anybody who gets in the way of them and their meal. Of course, on the other end, the child is also kept alive so the mother changeling can feed off the children. And when the human mothers eventually die, the children are disposed of, and the changelings move on. That's a whole lot of death going around. At number 8, we have Hellhounds. Hellhounds appear in a lot of mythology around the world. Almost every culture has their own version, but usually they're associated with death and the underworld, guarding souls, guarding churches, guarding graveyards, or accompanying reapers, or being reapers themselves. Some don't actually do anything, but if you see them, well, that's bad news. It's an omen of death, like the Grimm in Harry Potter. They can have a lot of different characteristics too. Black fur, glowing eyes, super strength, super speed, an intangible ghostly form, maybe accompanied by a foul odor. And they can be large like a wolf, or as big as a horse. In Supernatural, Hellhounds are enormous canines from hell meant to inspire fear, and they viciously collect souls to be dragged to hell, usually as part of a crossroad deal coming to an end. But they're also used as vicious attack dogs by various demons and even Lucifer. In a heartbreaking scene at the end of season 3, we watch as Dean is ripped apart in front of his brother, and his soul is dragged to hell after making a bargain to save Sam's life. What makes them so absolutely terrifying is the fact that you can't see them unless you're the one that's damned. So it makes them almost impossible to fight. And if they are there to claim you, well, you're destined for hell. At number 7, we have the Shapeshifter. Like Hellhounds, almost every culture around the world has their own version. And they're not always a malicious entity. In fact, they're actually quite a popular trope among modern pop culture. The term shapeshifter is used to describe someone who, well, shifts form. And this can be anything from changing into another animal, another person, or a new form in general, like a tree or sunlight. Often in mythology, gods change form all the time to trick humans, like Zeus or Loki. Sometimes it's a curse, like werewolves, or a form of punishment. But a shapeshifter can also just be an animal that changes into other animals as well. Many cultures have shapeshifters that change into female form to seduce and devour men. In the Supernatural verse, they keep it a little more simple, with the fact that they are humanoid monsters that can shift into the form of anyone. They're almost impossible to detect, unless you have silver that can burn their skin, or their eyes happen to flare in a lens. And then on top of that, they can mentally download your brain, so they essentially become you. But the idea that this monster can be absolutely anyone is terrifying. They can take over your life, frame you for a crime, generally slip through society without detection, committing horrible crimes, being a serial killer or a rapist. One could have already taken the place of your lover or your brother or your best friend, and eventually when they move on, your loved one becomes just another missing person, or they're convicted of a crime that they never committed. At number 6, we have the Jinn. The Jinn are part of pre-Islamic and Islamic mythology, and they can be found all throughout the Quran. But they were first integrated into the religion from pagan beliefs. They aren't good and they aren't bad, at least not from birth. Their nature comes from whether or not they accept God. And in pre-Islamic times, they were worshipped or called upon for help. Honestly, it's not entirely certain where the Jinn came from. But as the mythology spread, they became more connected with the idea of spirits and deities. They often become associated with deserts or unclean places, and they can be in the form of animals. Not to mention they are also associated with mental illness, which represents itself in what we think of as possession. The term genie is a more anglicized version that came from French, but a genie is more of a guardian spirit. In Supernatural, they are monsters, which isn't really the same as the myths that they came from, but they are inherently creepy. And they come in a few varieties. The most common aspect is they create a false reality, and they slowly feed off you until you die completely oblivious. Usually the reality is a dream come true, a world where you have everything you have ever wanted. But in reality, you are slowly dying as they drain you. It's the other kind of Jinn that's even freakier, because what they feed off of is fear. That means instead of being trapped in a fantasy world, you're trapped in an absolute nightmare. And in the end, you essentially die of fear. Up next, we have the Rakshasa. These goblin-like creatures or demons come from Hindu mythology and can shapeshift at will, but they're often depicted with tusks and ugly eyes. They carry a horrific array of weapons, and they're strongest at night, as they tend to dissipate during the day. But their main goal is usually to eat human flesh, haunt cemeteries, or drink a cow's milk until the animal is dry. In Supernatural, they are far more horrific, and if you don't like clowns, I suggest you skip ahead. In the show, we only see the Rakshasa once, thankfully. It's using the form of a clown to entice children to invite it into the house at night, because they can't enter without an invitation. But this is all so they can murder and devour the parents. Even worse, if you can think of anything worse than a child watching their parents brutally murdered and then eaten, it's pretty much invulnerable. Brass is its only weakness, and let me tell you, that's not exactly common these days. At number 4, we have ghouls. Ghouls are a demonic entity that come from Arabic folklore. They usually prowl graveyards in order to eat the flesh of the dead, and they have the ability to shapeshift. In Supernatural, it's more or less the same, which in and of itself is not all that terrifying. You want to eat dead bodies? Okay, you do you. It's more the direction that a pair of ghouls took that's so freaky. In the first episode that we meet them, it's a pair of ghoul children that are taking revenge for a parent that has been killed, but they're not eating dead flesh. They got sick of eating dead flesh and instead decided to move on to fresh. So not only are they killing people, but they're actually eating people alive. And this is how Sam and Dean lose their brother, their younger brother that they'd never actually met before. Number 3, the Wendigo. The lore of the Wendigo actually comes from my home country of Canada, with its roots in the Algonquin people that lived along the banks of the Great Lakes and into eastern Canada. It has lots of different names, most of which I can't pronounce. But essentially they are humans that, because of their greed, have been transformed, and they become a horrific creature that has an insatiable need to kill and devour its victims. In other versions, we see them weakened from extreme hunger or cold. People have been forced to give into that one taboo. Or they are people who have been possessed by an evil spirit during a moment of weakness. More or less, this folklore seems to stem from cautionary tales, as most folklore does. One that deals with the evils of isolation and selfishness. Supernatural isn't all that far off in their lore. The Wendigo that they face is likely a result of somebody being forced to consume human flesh in order to survive in an extreme condition. But in doing so, they cursed themselves, and now they have an insatiable need to eat human flesh. But they've also taken on supernatural abilities, like incredible speed or strength. This episode is only the second in the entire series, so they didn't exactly have the budget at the time to make it really terrifying. But it's an intense ride, because the beginning of Supernatural, their best element was suspense. And we're talking about monsters that you don't actually see until the very end of the episode. You hear and you see evidence of them, but you don't see them. Honestly, Supernatural just doesn't do suspense the way they used to. Overall, the episode is just creepy and disturbing. Not only from the suspense, but also just the sounds. And the idea of how they rip you apart and eat you alive. I was still young when the episode first came out, and yeah, I actually saw it when it first came out. But it gave me nightmares at the time, and it still creeps me out even to this day. Number 2, the Rougarou. In historical lore, the Rougarou is actually quite different than its supernatural counterpart. The myth itself comes from French-influenced communities, like the Métis or Cajun, and more or less it's a derivative of the werewolf, with wolf-like transformations. Think wolf head, human body. It was more used to inspire fear and obedience in children. The Rougarou would hunt down unfaithful Catholics or those who broke Lent. Supernatural took the lore in a absolutely horrifying direction. Forget being a simple transformation with blood sucking. Supernatural decided that the creature craved raw flesh. Human flesh. I'm beginning to see a common theme here. The Rougarou of Supernatural is born and lives as a human, completely unaware. It's a genetic condition, actually, but eventually they give into that urge to just eat. They consume absolutely anything until they finally give into that need to eat human flesh. But once they break that taboo, the transformation is complete, and there's no going back. The scariest part of this is that you don't know. You don't know if you're a Rougarou. It's dormant. It's laying hidden inside of you. And then one day, you snap. You give in to the uncontrollable craving. You're willing to eat anyone and anything, even the ones you love. Which means that anyone can be a Rougarou. even you. In the top spot, we have the Leviathan. That's right, the big bad monsters themselves. Without parallel, the Leviathans are probably the worst and scariest monsters that Sam and Dean have ever faced. The roots of this monster in historical lore is old. We're talking an ancient primeval creature. It's usually depicted as a giant serpent of some sort, something that deals with the forces of chaos. This is usually a representation of the incomparable strength of an enemy in battle, someone who is nearly undefeatable. In Judeo-Christian mythology, it's more of a sea monster, or so it seems, but it's one that can destroy the world. As usual, Supernatural went in a bit of a different direction, and honestly, I think it's much more terrifying. They are primordial monsters that were essentially God's trial run. They came before angels, before humans, but they were much too destructive. So God locked them in purgatory and started all over. To Leviathans, humans are little more than cattle. A food source. Their creepy mouths can open so wide that they can consume a person whole. They are stronger than any angel or demon, and they are essentially invulnerable, even if you smash them with a car into a pancake. It also doesn't help that they seem to be able to shapeshift. It's their mouths that really get me. It's so disturbing to look at. But it's also the fact that they could conceivably enslave the entire human race, basically breed and harvest humans for their own consumption. People don't really like to think about it, but this is essentially how we treat animals already. Leviathans just happen to be higher up on the food chain than us. And we just don't like to think about it. Well, that's it for now. Hopefully Supernatural picks up filming soon and we get the ending we deserve. But until then, cheers!